The Soviet Union, having infiltrated the United States federal government, engaged in the promotion of the KKK for the purposes of advancing the Confederacy as a communist use of demoralization against the United States, which would leverage racist dog whistles and other fake policies in order to cripple national security and undermine it in the use of clever words in order to make defenses mean their opposite and nullifying their very effect by the insurrectionists, such as complicit by judicial activists who clearly use the defamatory mechanism in order to neuter the law from any government to defend it, and therefore neutralize the nation of law, which is the Constitution of consolidated sovereignty, and therefore use sovereignty in order to engage in immunities for attacking the sovereign, which is the source of the immunity, which nullifies the immunity, which then, as a foreign state actor, is no longer protected as that thing, as therefore their attack neutralizes their access to the immunity which they would otherwise posture as in their fraudulent assertion of the confidence game in order to engage in their rebellion against the United States, targeting David Bowles under the assumption that he's the intelligence oversight congressional oversight six-star general, which then maintains the function of his primary enforcement for Congress against the president and other executive insurgents by the impeachment process, and therefore the arrangement of replacing that with a play version with fake impeachments in order to assert a fake authority, which would not actually materially have effect, therefore neuters in the postured play the impeachment authority of Congress against the president, as it is nothing more than showboating as a false distraction in political theater. To this extent, Congress has been fully neutered, the judiciary has been fully neutered in service of the Soviet Union and its unitary executive theory, in advancement of its companion fake opponent, the fascist Nazis, who were infiltrating into the United States by the plan of the Confederates, who bankrupted the United States stock market in order to fund the blueprints for the Nazis, which then facilitated their being crushed by the compulsory war and digestion and protection of them under the secrets function as a designed upgrade to Confederate racism. Their assertion arresting illegally of David Bowles under that assumption, claiming the control over as the patriarchy assumes the contract schedule which they took in the takings, which they would destroy after creating liabilities or federal debts for those who destroyed the seized assets by the federal government, which owes him its restoration from the seizure takings in the full fair market value therein for its restoration, as to not allow for the continuation of its insult by the degrading of status, office, or of human decency. To this extent, its continuation asserts David as the patriarchy, as the advanced leadership of the aristocracy which chooses the Senate, and is also fundamental in the political arena towards the rest of the elected parties, which is the foundation of his own political party, which would be the head political broker in the nation, which then facilitates substantive changes by the Soviet insurgents, facilitating their infiltration by Soviet voter fraud, creating substantive changes by the censorship of the general public, such as the barring of David's national news for the purposes of that censorship for substantive changes to the result, and their attacks against David as an individual and as a party and other faculties in order to materialize the effectiveness of their war against the United States to destroy the West without firing a single Russian bullet. This assumes the position that David could not be corrupted, therefore the function of his masculinity being a primary target facilitates the actions of them attacking all of his projected strengths, which then facilitates the opposition to all masculinity inside of the federal government, which would have assisted the national security interest, which is fundamental to the officers being restrained in their official capacity for the purposes of the sedition, to block their official capacity from being properly served, and therefore the insult against every man inside the United States military as a transsexual traitor. To this extent, their acceptance of that positions of aiding and abetting the white trash in their communist coup materializes their confession to lack of masculinity and other contemptible behaviors, which the communists they're protecting will use against them when they are completely eradicated as the retaliation by the Communist Party for being contemptible enough to have done so or letting them in the first place. To this extent, it is a self-inflicted injury to have asserted support for the unitary executive theory and other USSR conspiracies, as those who would endorse it are little more than a petty little bitch who, in having earned the contempt, will be exterminated with extreme brutality and suffering, at which point the Khmer Rouge and its coup against the Cambodians, having received the extraordinary punishments and prisons and tortures, including the loss of limbs in those tortures, will be used against them. Everything that they have practiced by the CIA, torture techniques and others, will be used against them as a standard minimum for the contemptibility that they have earned, proving from them being, in practice, a sniveling little cunt who was stupid enough to lie for the Communist Party and its coup against the government, protecting them from the injuries intended by the Communist Party, which by definition has a progress of growth into the anarchist position to collapse, and therefore the fake virtue signaling position, such as an anarchist party or a libertarian party or other fake distractions, would be assumed for the purposes of dismantling the government into the anarchist state, which is the procedure process for selling the right of conquest of the United States by those intending to destroy it in having received their payment in the deal with the devil from the communists, who, having received that money, have proven that they are contemptible and will be retaliated against the replacement government that will, like the British conquering the Indians, who have sustained their anarchical society, were easily conquered by the British because they had assertions of flags and jurisdictions and misdirections, which will be used against them by those that have bought the right of conquest after everything has been thoroughly prepared by the collapse of the government for the purposes of compulsory enforcement of the anarchist state, or the state of no state amongst society, in the natural progress according to the communist spell, inherent and fundamental to their political idealism, which has at it the false misdirections and false flags assumed by the strawman arguments of a fake opposition, such as the alt-left, such as the hyper-piercings and blue hair and whatnot, and everything that you want to make fun of them for, or any of the other defects that you would perceive from them designed in the strawman argument is constructed by the Communist Party and is in fact not a representation of the Communist Party. It is a false rallying call in order to assert aggression, which in the pendulum swinging goes both ways, is specifically designed to injure critical security structures threatening the Communist Party, and therefore is nothing more than the progression, step by step, of the communist insurrection against the United States, which all parties who supported and protected those mechanisms are a part of as a mutual aiding and abetting of the insurrection. and this includes the function of its alliance with Israel and others, as the Confederates, providing the deal with the devil to the Jews, gave the strawman argument of the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion as a blueprint to enforce for the progress of the Soviet Union's plot to destroy the United States, at which point mobsters or criminals amongst the Jewish community, forming a community of criminals, have accepted that deal and are actively conducting it, and therefore it is not racist to say that they're doing the Protocols of Learned of Zion. It's racist for them to support the enforcement of the Protocols of Learned of Zion, which has added the primary objective of the mass sacrifice of their racial or other groups, hence the Jews, in order to engage in the mass sacrifice of their populations, to hunt them across the world as terrorists, as is derived by the policies in the War on Terror, which provides the access or jurisdiction for them to be hunted around the world, purging their existence from the planet as a racist act, or the function of automating the material realization of the desires of the crafted Jewish anti-Semites, as is expressed in the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, to be a Jewish communist conspiracy, which then comes at it at the function of the Nazis, who assumed that the capitalist structure is a Jewish conspiracy as a fundamental aspect of the use of their God, which is then undermined by the concept of communism in the first place, which, as a Jewish conspiracy, is a contradiction to the function of the religious Jew. According to that contradiction, which should be served as a proof that they are a rebellious criminal insurgency conspiring against the rest of their community, instead of proof of its illogical nature, and therefore the function of its convoluted, entangled reasoning is proof and not to be considered evidence of its not being true, but rather its material validation. To this end, the Jewish anti-Semitic conspiracy materializes the interest for the eradication of the Jewish race as a mass sacrifice according to the devil religion, which, having proven competencies in battle against the enemy of the devils, is proven by the success rate or competency of more injury for fewer risks, and therefore the higher success rate of those commanding the forces for the devil, and therefore the function of fully removing all security and engaging in ritual sacrifice being the pinnacle of competency in the eradication of their enemy in service for the material pleasures of their devil, creates the positive use or repurpose of the negative energy from that sacrifice in order to manufacture the higher potency spells specifically interested, such as the function proven in Vecna's creation by the mass death negative energy, assumes the ingestion of that energy into itself as its own material power or mechanism, which has added its self-automating protections from being duplicated, and therefore the incompetents who assume from the inferior cults to be sacrificed do the ritual, which then becomes a subversion to itself, which then turns them, instead of to a more powerful undead god, into a Nothic, which that negative energy, having been defective, is then diffused into the actual repurposing of the undead god Vecna, according to their ritual objectives, according to the systems from the conspiracy, as it's repurposed according to their distraction narratives, specifically explaining it by a mechanism designed to not be properly taken seriously so that they can do it without being disturbed, allowing them to accomplish it by their distraction methods, which is official CIA policy of misdirection and fraud in order to scam any opponent in the position that might undermine their objectives, as to make them not taken seriously in the demoralization process so that they can accomplish the entirety of their stated objective and mission. Now, the deal with the devil has the objective of compulsory selling of the soul, which requires them to lie for the Communist Party in the insurrection concerning the damages against the interest of the person who is told to lie for the Communist Party, which makes them self-inflicted, as the vulnerability is their gross negligence or intention to make themselves vulnerable to the attack, similar to the function in 9/11, where New York's leadership, like Giuliani, was told that David was essential to stopping the 9/11 terrorist attack, which they were told to remove that security for, as they systematically purged all essential protections so that the attack could happen, and they were given the false bluff concerning that thing, that if they did so in proof of their compliance and service as loyal to the intelligence community, who are the Soviet insurgents, then they wouldn't do the 9/11 terror attack, which had a clear and obvious consequences, as the false flag from Northwoods, in order to create the terror attack designed by the Confederate white trash communist insurgents, was designed to have a byproduct of the reaction, according to the Hegelian dialectic, problem, desire, problem, solution, reaction, which then facilitates their ability to progress against constitutional and legal limitations, which are ignored for the false exception that they are guilty of, paying them for having done the crime in the first place, which then asserts itself to the political theater, essential as they enforce the various spells in order to traumatize the public, according to the communist position, of getting everyone to be willfully delusional in the lying for the Communist Party for the intentional progress of the suicide of the nation. This applied throughout the entire system, includes the Lahaina fires, which has Hawaii people who understood that the Lahaina fire was going to exist and that David would be able to solve it, as the Intelligence Oversight Six-Star Congressional Oversight General would fundamentally be essential to stopping the fires or protecting with the insurance bond against the fires, such as their connection to him by allowing him to work, which would require them to release his faculties for the special mission, which then would allow for that to happen, which would include, after he had earned all of the prerequisite money to invest into it, would create an art company and import Hollywood talent in order to engage in prolonged TV shows, which would rely on all of the products being protected in Lahaina for all of its citizens to be given a special employment role and therefore special fire insurance and other protections as a fundamental bonus for their employment, as a fundamentally connected aspect of their perfection in that capability, materializes the TV show's ability to deposit all of its materials there as they go about on set and create all of the essential prerequisite services where needed, where it can be returned, which has added its most access to the Lahaina itself, but would need to actively travel for a diverse set. And this, of course, would have the reconstruction of essential faculties to that mission, such as David's bank, which would have David's credit card system connected to it, as well as insurance and protection against fire and other damages inside the bank itself. So the protected services, such as cryptocurrencies and whatnot, would have actively already existed or had been purchased, which would be fully insured, and therefore the function of those who have purchased things with the credit card that they haven't paid off yet would be seized as owned by the bank that gave them the credit in the first place, where it would be held until they could pay off the various loans according to whatever specific policy which is being obstructed by the restraint against David's faculties, and therefore is its own in-depth study. And according to that system, when they discovered that they would have to return David's faculties so that he would be competent enough in order to be able to do the services, as they've been obstructing his sex life, they would have to return his sexual market value in sex life, because his sex is connected to his mental abilities, which is going to be essential for him to have successfully plotted and traded into enough money in order to have paid for the insurance coverage. Therefore, the system had to be dissolved on the basis that they would have to abandon the Antichrist ritual of turning David Bulls into the Antichrist, restraining his title, and then releasing it all at once, making the world leader under their control, specifically a secret until not a secret. And therefore, the function of the Antichrist includes subroutines such as the attack against his sexuality, as the Antichrist, having his own subversive sexual tendencies, does not give himself to sexual relationships with women, and therefore is compelled into non-sexual relationships, and therefore compelled celibacy until that position, as is derived by the Me Too rape culture, which has the use of the intelligence agencies to enforce the Me Too rape culture by the rent controls of the sexual market value and its various Roofies Plus, which actively manipulate the engagement by those secrets promoted by the Soviet Union in order to get society to collapse in the depopulation, degrowth procedures essential for the eradication of national security. And backed into a corner concerning having to give up their deal with the devil, would have to have abandoned their sacrifice to Satan, having sold their souls in order to assist in the function, forfeited the protection essential by lying for the Communist Party, so that the damages could happen on purpose in service of Satan. That relationship would have a side consequence of importing the talent from Hollywood, which would also have to be insured, as the function of their protections would have the non-profits in order to enforce the zombie insurance that they would have purchased for that engagement, which would have protected their Hollywood locations, which is relevant to the LA fires, which would have had counteractions, as David's zombie insurance would have had to have contracted the design of nonprofits in order to be subversive towards the fire, in order to continue the protections of those agencies, which would have had the full investigative journalists and other systems essential in order to have protected the mechanisms against the potential damages, and therefore would have stopped it, which California agents would have had to have lied for the Communist Party in order to have protected, as many of them having taken the resources from the Communist Party, lying for the Communist Party for the payment to neutralize the security essential to the state and the civilian population in rebellion against their office. This, as a matter of fact, would have a network effect as a compounding series of effects on debt from the credit cards and other loans, which would have material products which would be owned by the bank, which they would have had to have kept in Lahaina's security vault in order to hold it until they've paid it off, where it would be returned to them until their loan has been paid and therefore dissolves the control of the bank when it has been fully and properly purchased. It and all of the safekeeping products, having been fully insured in the Lahaina Bank, would have been fully protected to the fullest extent of the coverage, which would have backup insurance coverage under it in order to secure against the most defended thing, which, according to the historic position of the white trash, to attack David's strengths, would seek to destroy David concerning the thing that he is strongest against and has the most protections against, according its reconstruction, which is designed against the fire. In the example of the bank and its safe deposit of the protected products, which includes his other investments, which includes the function of many, many investments which would be fully insured in case of the emergency, exceeding his capabilities of protections which would have been extraordinarily expensive and secure, tantamount to the proof positive of an extraordinary attack beyond a lesser attack such as a drought fire, which would prove additional malice, such as a firebomb or space laser. So let me give you an example of their spell weave. The function of the communist, white supremacist, centrally planned economy changes status in office, which then allows them to engage in broken windows policies, which then allows them to use racist dog whistle policies to enforce law against things for the purposes of racism without race, and therefore racism without race automated into that function progresses towards the oppression and therefore the oppressed, who are sacrificed to the trash bin of history as expendables and therefore engaged in the retaliations, which then incites revolution towards the direction of the Communist Party, who needed all of the injuries in order to incite by those being sacrificed. And to this end, you actively have systems. So let's say you have an entanglement of a centrally planned economy where they repurpose it, having seized it and given it towards their fascist choice, who then engages in essential services as a private sector function to things that they would not be able to do as a government. To this extent, the manipulation of this function then subordinates themselves to it under the agreement that they will continue the long-term plot as a phantom cell, ordering them from the additional leverage to do the thing that they paid it to order, and therefore receive the order by the insurgency from the insurgency through its shell companies in order to facilitate the outcome, which then materializes the function of their Israel lobby and other functions that might exacerbate or accelerate problems where people would like to complain about, such as the interest of promoting the destruction of Christianity from that laundering system, which is a goal of the Communist Party, which relies on atheism fundamentally, and therefore has the series of interwoven disguises of parties engaging in essential actions as a disguise for the communist direction, which, having accelerated itself by having paid the thing that it was going to do anyways, by paying it into a shell company, materializes the increase of wealth and power of itself by the mediation as a corrupted, contemptible variation of Don Senior Bull's deal with David Bull's concerning the Legend of David nonprofit companies, which have at it the full structure of the things being seized according to the registered companies that, having been seized, were then classified, and therefore they pretend that they don't know about them, understanding the value of the contract schedule in order to neutralize the contract schedule as the immune medicine to the thing that the communists were doing, and therefore the parasite of the Communist Party had to destroy it for the progress of communism against capitalism and the Constitution. Now, everything that you would complain about the lobby and others are derivative of that shell company laundering system, and it is not derivative of Israel as a whole or Jews or what have you. It is derivative of the white trash Communist Party known as the Confederacy, which was actively promoted by Lindsey Graham in order to facilitate its full protection against the United States federal government and state governments from legal reactions, and it being protected from the enforcement of law materializes the function of the Soviet Union's guaranteed eradication of America as proof positive of particular specific essential weaknesses in the selling of the right of conquest of the United States by the white trash degenerates whose core identity is their poverty and starvation. And to this extent, that core identity as an act of treason materializes its protection against the enforcement of law like the act of treason, which then prevents, in an act of national suicide, the suicide pact of the communist insurrection. That they, according to their demonic function of inferior degenerates receiving payment out of jealousy and petty bitterness, materializes the function of Nargles from 401k, from the Chaos Gods and others, which have at their core identity as cosmic trash cans the function of celebrating and promoting the desired social advancement of disease and rot and disgustingness. At which point, the act of them cursing each other would be get well soon as a prospect thing, which was more excellently said by another. To this extent, that type of mechanism, allowing them to have their oppositions and contest according to this, serves as a proper disguise to those that otherwise might have perceived the acts of subversion as something that would be subversive, alternatively demonstrating a neutral karmic illusion, asserting the position that they can't be bothered by the thing, when in fact the communists share our words but not our definitions, and therefore there is a thieves' cant subversive into that arrangement, which most in the public would not be able to comprehend and categorize acceptably, and therefore continue on to be the same weak position as it continues exponentially until the critical failure and collapse into the system as they choose death.